Giles, Stuart, Sonia, Thomas, Jesse, and Derek presenting this one. So I will. Who's going to be kicking this one off? So Giles, I'll leave it up to you. So kick it off, Giles.
Thank you, Dion. So yes, this is the. We'll just get it on the screen for those. Wait a couple of moments. So this is a further conversation around some important PT topics. We want to focus the main part of the session today on the fare structure going forward, but there are a number of other areas that we wanted to cover off. We also wanted to give you a bit of additional context that's come through in the last couple of days. That's really important in terms of how we set the agenda for public transport over the next few years in relation to government expectations for what is now called private revenue share, which broadly speaking is equivalent to fare box recovery, but is not exactly the same, but they're broadly equivalent. Next slide, please. So this just highlights where we are in the process in terms of annual plan, briefings and workshops. So we're now on the 20th of November, and again, a number of areas that we'll cover so that we can have final guidance in December to produce the annual plan for consultation next year, if required. The areas we want to cover, so this highlights the things that we have talked about in terms of PT over the last few sessions. Today we're going to cover future fare structure and options that support that, regional rail, MRT, cruise ships, new service requests, and also the total mobility subsidy. And then there'll be a further discussion on the 4th of December. And as I say, depending on that additional context, which we'll talk to you about, we may need to think about how we effectively engage with councillors on that. So this is the same thing, but it is indicating where we think we should head from a staff advice perspective. And so, yeah, move on. I think that's the broad agenda. And I think Stuart and the team are probably going to lead you through.
Kia ora koutou. We've talked to Council several times around some changes in government approach to the funding models for public transport. This was indicated in the GPS statement on transport, where there was an intent or a desire to increase the private revenue share for public transport in New Zealand, and NZTA were working on some targets for each PTA to work towards, and as Giles mentioned, this information was provided to us this week, so it's a bit of a hot off the press. So just to give you a reminder of what is meant by private revenue share. So it's a calculation that looks at all of the private revenue we obtain, which includes fares, advertising, any commercial rent relating to public transport. We don't have any of that, but it is relevant for the infrastructure side of the equation. So CCC would have some of this. Any staff sponsorship of fares from corporations. So let's say, for example, ABC Corporation decided to fund 50% of their staff's use of public transport, then that would be considered private revenue as well. What's important to recognise is that private revenue does not include funding for SuperGold fares or Community Connect subsidies from the Crown, even though they are recognised in our accounts as fare revenue. They are considered a government subsidy, and so don't count in terms of private revenue. And so the ratio puts those revenue dollars over the top of our operating costs to calculate how much of the PT system, operating system, is funded from private revenue, as opposed to Farebox, which only looked at the bus contract cost component of our operating costs. So the operating cost footprint is wider. So when we think about influencing the private revenue share ratio, there's really two ways, simplistically, for us to do that. The first lever we can pull is to increase our revenue by increasing our fares, or by obtaining better returns out of our advertising contracts, or by encouraging other third parties such as corporations to subsidise their staff for public transport for a whole bunch of benefits. So those are a bunch of things that we could do in the revenue side. The alternative is to decrease the cost side of the equation to have a different ratio. And how we would decrease costs? Well, we could look at our network and rationalise that in some way using some criteria. Government have suggested looking at low-performing services. We could choose to sweat some of our fleet longer and delay the decarbonisation process. Things like that would reduce the cost side of our equation. So these are the preliminary targets that have been set for Canterbury. And we are booked in with NZTA to start this dialogue and conversation on the 27th of November. It's fair to say that our initial assessment of these targets is that they're going to prove very challenging for us to meet, given our current public transport system delivery, fares model, and how public transport in Greater Christchurch in particular functions. So to give you a sense of what that means from a fiscal perspective, and this is simply looking at it against our current LTP budget. So I need to make it clear that these are estimates and there are some caveats around this, but it gives you a ballpark sense of the scale of the challenge for us. And what I've done is taken out, I've assumed that the funding that didn't come through from the NLTP for our service uplifts, I've taken those costs out. Because as we've already discussed, we don't intend to do a service uplift on Route 5, for example, because there's no funding to support that. So those costs have been taken out. So what we can see, NZTA have suggested targets for the 3 years incorporating the current NLTP period. So that includes this fiscal year. And of course, we've only got half of that year left to achieve this target. So the target for this year is 18%. We're currently running at around 12. So we're not aligned to achieving that target. In order to achieve that target, we'd need to generate revenue of $23 million. And we're not going to do that this year. So we're estimating to be $9 million short. So the question for us is, can we generate $9 million in the next 6 months? It's probably unlikely we're going to be able to do that. Alternatively, can we reduce our costs by 7% to again achieve that ratio? And that's quite a significant conversation for council to have. So there's a lot of work to do here to understand this and unpack this some more, to be able to provide you with some more insight and some more detail for thought. As I said, we've only just received this information late on Monday evening, so we need to spend quite a lot of time analysing it and understanding it. And of course, we've got conversations with NZTA later this month to start that sort of learning process. What's also important to recognise is this will have a material influence on the decisions council makes around our fares policy for future years, around our aspirations for our network growth, particularly when we think about wanting to take an approach to expand in the sort of areas outside Greater Christchurch, which have lower populations and less high performing opportunities, and also thinking about what initiatives we might want to fund, because we need to account for the other side of the ledger, the revenue side of the ledger. So these are quite material things for us to consider and understand when we think about our budgets for the next few years.
Stuart, I'm just going to pause there for a second, because I think this is quite huge for the council, and it's quite a bit of information for us to digest early on a Wednesday morning. And I believe there might be a couple of questions just regarding this. So I think Councillor Mackay.
Thanks, Stuart. A very challenging slide, no doubt. When did we become aware of the fact that the government was expecting us to meet some targets in the year that we're actually already in? I mean, it does seem quite unfair when long-term plans are set, and I presume everybody's on a long-term plan at the same time as us, given that how they work with election cycles, to meet that. And have we actually agreed to it, or no, we haven't? Okay.
We don't get to agree.
So we became aware of the expectation of meeting a target for this fiscal year this week. We've been aware that NZTA were going to develop some targets for each PTA for some time, but as I said, this week was when we received this information. And they have not been agreed by Environment Canterbury yet. So the intention is, over the period 27th of November through to 19th of December, NZTA's expectation is that public transport authorities will reach some sort of preliminary agreement through staff engagement, but they recognise that ultimately councils need to endorse any targets. So that in itself is, I think, challenging for us. I don't think, or me personally, and staff would feel comfortable reaching any sort of interim or any sort of agreement around these targets until council are really across it.
Stuart, one question that I have there is just on the back of that would be, are NZTA predicating any of their funding on if we do not agree to these targets? No, you can keep going. You need to press your button because it was still on.
Sorry, we're yet to have those conversations to understand the wider consequence of the outcomes of this conversation with NZTA.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Chairman. You referred to there's a complexity in working out the funding envelope, or whatever you call it, at the end of your presentation. And I imagine that's around reducing OPEX will then have a commensurate reduction in income if you start cutting services, presumably. So that's part of the equation you're trying to work out. So in terms of a 7% reduction in OPEX, it's not as simple as that, is what you're saying, isn't it? Yeah, because you can have it, so it may be a 15% reduction in service to get a 7% reduction in operating expenses. I mean, maybe, yeah.
So, as well as the indicative targets that we received 48 hours ago, we also received 50 pages of guidance. It is quite complex. It seems to not take account of the political cycle and annual plans and long-term plans and budgeting. And even if we were able to agree the targets, we need a plan to at least demonstrate progress towards them. And given the nature of what we believe these mean, we need to be really clear what that plan is and to have council support, which has significant implications for the direction of travel that this council has tried to be taking public transport in, and that you have had support from the community to deliver. And so there is a lot of work, A, to understand, B, to engage with NZTA to understand their expectations and their logic behind some of the detail in the guidance, and then also to engage with council about, well, how do you want to respond to this and implement it or demonstrate progress towards it whilst protecting the public transport network?
I think you've just asked my follow-up question, which is, have NZTA given you any indication of what they expect you to do to meet these targets, such as drop off poor performing services, or but you just said that you haven't had that conversation.
So we haven't had that conversation, but there's a very clear direction from government around the economic viability of public transport, which, in terms of patronage, reliability on core services, and maybe to the less emphasis on climate change and accessibility. So moving away from coverage. So we know that in the GPS it's very clear that there's an expectation that we review our poorer performing routes. That is clearly one mechanism that can help to influence that calculation.
Sorry, one further question, because the answers keep triggering more.
Make it quick.
So to do the analysis of dropping off poorer performing routes, how quickly can you do the analysis of how that might increase fare recovery compared to OPEX costs, and therefore if you drop off those routes, what that looks like in terms of reduction in OPEX without affecting? Is that a simple push a button in your computer program, stick out the answers, or is it this is months of analysis from your staff?
It's not a simple task. I think, as Giles alluded to, there's many permutations and combinations here to sort of consider an optioneer in terms of what might be the least damaging and best outcome, if you like, if we were to go down the OPEX reduction road. And I would say that we probably don't want to go straight to that idea. I think we want to have a conversation with NZTA first and get a better understanding of how fixed are these targets? Are they open for negotiation? Can we influence them? What's the consequence of not achieving? We need to understand a lot more about the box we're working within to help us target our time and energy to see what the best approach is to this outcome. So, I mean, OPEX is, as I've highlighted there, just to give you the stark bookends, is one scenario for us to look at, and may well remain as part of our package of interventions. But it is a complex piece of work to go through.
All right, thanks. We'll carry on with the presentation, but thanks for dropping the bombshell on us like that. It's going to be challenging.
So sorry, just a question. So the 19th of December deadline, and you're saying that you need our guidance and stuff. So I'm assuming, is it going to come to the 11th of December meeting for a decision, or what's the process?
NZTA's expectation is that staff would agree the targets subject to council formal endorsement in the new year. As Stuart said, we feel very uncomfortable with that, particularly, and we would feel uncomfortable with it anyway, particularly given the indicative targets that are being presented. We will know more when we've studied the guidance in detail and had that conversation with NZTA next week in terms of how do we take this forward. And one of the reasons we wanted to include this in the presentation today was to ensure that councillors had context for the conversation around fare structures, recognising there's a lot more conversation to be had in this space before we land it.
I'm just highlighting that we do have the 11th of December, so if we need to use it for the council to make a decision to inform what you're doing, then let's do it. Yep.
Okay, so one of the key focuses of this morning's session is to continue the conversation around fares, policy and options and learnings from the fare trial. Again, just to sort of help inform that conversation and thinking about this GPS expectations and NZTA expectations around private revenue share. Council will remember we've talked about the expectation of PTAs reviewing their fares on an annual basis and with the intent of adjusting for as a minimum inflation, etc., to keep fares aligned with cost aspects. So when we think about the work that's coming up, we're going to make some decisions on our new fares policy and fare pricing. Council is intending to engage with the community on that as part of our annual ban process. We've got NTS coming online next year for Greater Christchurch and for Timaru. So we need to align and integrate with that process when we set out and change our fares. So we've got a number of steps that we need to go through in terms of changes to our fare price over the next wee while. We'll need to do something in May when we transition to NTS with our fare prices. We'll need to do something in July when the flat fare trial finishes. And so council may want to consider, and this is one of the options that we'll bring to you, is adjusting the fares as of 1 July as a precursor to a new fare policy that we implement at a time to be confirmed with NTS when they're ready to enable a change in our fare policy. And then on an annual basis, adjusting our fares in line with the expectations of government. And we feel that it would be appropriate, once we have more clarity on what these step changes might be, that if we're able to, that we communicate those with the community so they get a heads up, if you like, of what's coming, rather than it being a surprise at that particular point in time. So just keeping that in mind when Thomas talks through the fares aspects. And just one last thing before Thomas gets into it. Given what we've learnt this week about the targets, it's fair to say that the work that we've just done around fare options and pricing and revenue outcomes is going to need to be redone, because it didn't have these targets in mind when we were doing all of our analysis. The analysis that we've done has been shaped by the conversations we've had to date with council. So we're going to have to iterate these, but the principles are still sound in what Thomas is going to talk about.
Grant?
Just going to question, in terms of those step changes, and if we're going to consider those as part of an annual plan engagement, what's the annual plan engagement process in terms of the timing of that?
Based on our last conversation with council, our expectation was that in December we would bring to you some final options for consideration, and you would make a decision as to which of those options would be included in your draft annual plan for consultation. We would then consult next year, and then you would make a final decision on our new fare policy to commence when NTS is ready to accommodate it. So that's kind of the original decision process that we were working to. We still think we're going to have to consult on something, but we may need to just take a step back and reflect on the new information we've received about what those options might look like.
Stuart, there's quite a lot of information. It's a lot of dense information in this next session. Do you want to just go through these slides with a good flow? Councillors write their questions down and then ask them at the end when we get to the next section. Do you think that's best?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do that.
Kia ora koutou. So these are the slides from last week. Obviously, it's changed since then. But as Stuart mentioned, just the focus for this exercise has been on more on the objectives of the fare trial, which have consistently been patronage, access, and environmental outcomes, as well as the rates implications. So there is this really important context that's just been run through, but the fundamentals of the analysis in terms of actual local market research and the fundamental economics of it have not changed. So we will run through this and note where we need to do further analysis on different scenarios, etc. But yeah, this is all still very relevant for the discussions ahead. So as per last time, we'll do a quick recap on what has been covered or landed in the last two sessions. So last time, the key insight we were sharing and discussing was that we had two independent pieces of analysis done, market research and the price elasticity analysis, both of which, by our interpretation, indicated that in terms of the sweet spot of what is a reasonable Christchurch fare, it's the range of $2 to $3. That's what we see as the realm that we've got room to move in without having considerable impacts on retention, customer retention, and access. So in the previous sessions, we've also talked through some of the details of the fares package about reducing some of the free trips. Won't revisit that unless needed. As noted last time, there's a lot of overlap between the concession groups. So there is a proposal to rationalise the number of concessions for simplicity all round, and those modelled in the scenarios we'll go through. And we'll resume talking about the tag-off approaches for next time. So this is the key new information today. So following the last session, we've got a number of new scenarios as food for thought for potential future fares. So there are 20 different scenarios here. It's a combination of changing the overall fares at the top. So we've got the current $2 flat fare there, moving up to $2.50 or $3 across Greater Christchurch. And then the last two columns are moving something similar to what we had before, i.e. two zones. So fare for travel within a district, e.g. within Christchurch, and then an inter-district fare, which would be a bit higher, e.g. between Waimakariri and Christchurch. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation in the outcomes in terms of trips and revenue. As noted last time, we see the trips, which is based on the elasticity analysis, being quite conservative. Well, in that we don't expect the retention impact, the negative impact, to be as much as what's noted here. If we put a real focus on customer care and retention activity, that's the challenge we've got to minimise the churn. But as you'll see, there is churn of up to 15% in some of these scenarios. So it's a significant implication we're looking at. The other side of the coin is revenue. And you can see in terms of percentage change from the baseline, a lot of these scenarios give significant increases in revenue coming through. The highlighted ones, the 6 highlighted ones, are the ones that we see as most feasible, noting the bottom line that there is a need to increase revenue. Based on the news this week, the additional scenarios would likely be higher variations of these in terms of fares, so we can definitely provide that in a future meeting. But the sort of basic economics of this is that as the fares go higher and higher, so does customer churn. So it's not some kind of a linear increase we can expect. We also modelled.
Just I guess an observation that if we looked at the previous information around what our private share should be, and I'm thinking we should be at $3 today, $4 next year, and $6 the year after to meet those kind of targets. So I guess in a sense, has that information gazumped what we see on the screen? And I'm not sure, in a sense, looking at this, whether we achieve a heck of a lot, knowing that to get to 38% return in a couple of years' time, this just doesn't cut it. So it's more, I'm just going.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point to raise. Obviously, we've been thinking about that as well. I think when we having read the guidance that we just received, and I need to read it several more times because there's quite a lot of information in here. But as a first interpretation, NZTA are quite clear in their recognition that doing large step changes in fares is contrary. The outcome of that is significant reduction in patronage. It's contrary to one of the outcomes that government is seeking, which is patronage growth. So NZTA's view is that PTAs should adopt a philosophy of incremental change on an annualised basis dealing with inflation. So in our case, I think it's a given that we're going to have to do at least one significant step change in fares in the first instance to reset, and then we are going to need to consider this annual incremental adjustment. The other thing that's relevant, which I've talked to you about last briefing and fortuitously is in this document as well, is this concept of value, customer value. And so what is the customer prepared to pay for the level of service they're receiving? And so as Thomas has articulated, the research that we've done, the independent market research that we've done, suggests that our community thinks that up to $3 is a relative measure of the value of our current network service level. Because our network, compared to like Auckland and Wellington, is significantly lower level of service than those two networks. So we also need to think about, well, what's a reasonable price? So $6 or $8 is not realistic. And so my sense is, and I say I've only read this once, is that government and NZTA are not expecting PTAs to go to those extremes of pricing, because we all know that essentially will kill PT because people won't pay those prices. But so the challenge for us is to find the right spot that demonstrates a growth in revenue against growth in cost, but also is practical and reasonable for the level of service the customer is being delivered.
Was there somebody else that had a question? Otherwise, we'll move on very quickly, is it? Yeah.
I'm just wanting to seek clarity around the green boxes are the staff's preferred options, and yet in the slide above, we talk, or two slides before, we talk about rationalising eligibility 1925 tertiary and community sales concessions. So the green boxes to me include that we're looking back at concessions again. So can somebody explain?
Yes. So the three concessions that we see, well, which have significant overlap, are the 19 to 24, tertiary, and community services card. So all of these scenarios have community services card in them. What we're recommending is that we cease funding the tertiary one. So we move from the three options to two. So the bottom one includes everything, basically. 1A and 1B includes community services card and the 19 to 24. If we wanted to not have the 19 to 24, that would be the top one. And we've included all those options for your consideration.
So can you just remind me what the community services card is? It's 50% off or 50 cents?
It's half price. And that's to explain those, why when you go down, why they're actually quite similar. That the modelling has added has half price in all of these because that's what the government offer is. We've included if you like, the Environment Canterbury led concessions to remain $1 off the adult fare. So the model assumes rightly that people, when they've got the options, will choose community services card concessions. So that's why tinkering with concessions doesn't make that much difference.
And so you'll also notice there that we've modelled the $1 off for the under 25 concession, but also modelled a 50 cents off for the under 25 concession. So you've got some choices there.
Yeah, I thought the message was that, well, maybe I've just misinterpreted the room, but I had a funny feeling we'd sort of accepted your suggestions prior to this, and so I would have thought the top line, which is an extra 250k, for example, on a $3 fare, would have been, we should be going for everything that we can to try and increase this private share.
Yeah, so just reminding that these scenarios were done prior to the knowledge that we've just shared with you. So as we said, we're going to have to go back and do some new models, and it'll be useful to get a steer from council as to what we might consider. So, for example, as you've mentioned, Claire, should we do a more aggressive model with no concessions to maximising revenue is probably one of the options we should consider doing.
All right, well, Councillor Southworth.
Just because just the counter argument to that, which is not so much a question, but those under 25s are just a really key part. I think they've been a really growing part of our patronage. They're currently getting $1, so if you get rid of that concession and you're going to $3, you're more than doubling the fare. And if you're looking long term, getting these guys involved in using public transport on a regular basis, expectation is they then maintain some loyalty to public transport thereafter. So it's a longer term game. So I would really personally be keen to keep that under 25s.
Right. We'll carry on, finish the slides, and then we'll get into questions and have a conversation with.
Ooh. Yes, and the original first round of these workshops show that the youth patronage is a key driver for our growth. So we also modelled the reverting back to the pre-fair trial fares, and that resulted in a 13% decrease in trips modelled and a 40% increase in revenue. So one of the better ones, I guess, in terms of revenue outcomes. But yeah, from a customer's perspective, they were very complex, those fares. So there are negatives to returning to that too. A little bit more detail on those 6 that we highlighted in the last slide. So some initial run-throughs of what the private share ratio could be for those ones noted here. There's still more work to do on this, and we'll provide the latest information in the next briefing. But I guess, long story short, it's not close to what Stuart ran through earlier. So that's the crux of the challenge. The challenge here, what appears to be the logical suite of options from a local perspective are on a very different page to what we've been presented.
When we spoke last, we had a conversation around the implications of choosing to remain with a flat fare policy and what that would mean from a rating perspective, from a community equity point of view. And so the intention for us was to go away and do some work to understand the implications of embedding a flat fare philosophy and how we would need to consider changing our rating approach so that it was equitable across all public transport users in Greater Christchurch. So we've done that work. I'm kind of thinking now that perhaps not much point spending too much time on this because I'm not sure we're going to end up here. Perhaps we should cover this later because there's some more other things that we want to talk about that perhaps are a little bit more important than this right now.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I think we'll just park this one.
So it's boiling it all down, putting specific dollars aside. These are the 3 approaches to a fare suite that we intend to include as options for you for the annual plan. So firstly, having the flat fare model that we currently have, continuing that, but at a higher rate. Moving to a 2-zone model, which is based on the information so far, is our advice as the preferred approach. It allows to keep the travel within Christchurch at a reasonable level, and puts the price differentiation where it makes the most sense, i.e., for longer trips, and would not be complex to communicate to the community. And then thirdly, we've got reverting back to the status quo of the three zone systems, which is the most complex, but also has positive revenue implications. So I think for completeness, we think at least it would be worth including that in the options we present you in December.
We'll continue on. Yeah.
Just quickly, just responding to a couple of questions we had in the last session. So breaking down the insights, the market research we provided by key groups, i.e. Location, frequency of use, and concession eligibility. We took that back to the research company, and what they found was pretty intuitive. Really, it was quite similar, the insights across these groups. Obviously, people from Selwyn and Waimakere found the flat fare more appealing, sort of logical insights like that. So there were no real surprises from digging deeper into the data. And we went back to our reference groups. So we've got two reference groups we regularly meet with, an accessibility reference group and a broader reference group, which includes interest groups from across Greater Christchurch. And yeah, the feedback, as it has been over the last 18 months, has been really positive about the current fares package, the simplicity, but mainly the affordability of it. The total mobility concession from the accessibility reference group has been very well received, and we have had repeated feedback that the community services card concession alone does not cover the needs of total mobility users. Total mobility has not been modelled because it's not significant in terms of the overall dollars equations, and arguably it's a net benefit financially because if people take metro buses rather than taxis, that's a win-win. So this is just a beginning of the South Canterbury conversation, which of course is part of the mix with all of this. So this slide is not a recommendation for what fares should be for South Canterbury. It's really just to begin the thinking. So applying some of the fundamentals we've talked about, i.e. there's pressure to put prices up. And also we've had some really good learnings from the fare trial so far, which should be transferable to Timaru or South Canterbury. This is a first cut of how the approach we've taken for Greater Christchurch could apply for Timaru. So some food for thought. If people have comments on that from the South Canterbury perspective, that would be really useful for us as we prepare for the December session. And yeah, finally, I probably don't need to really talk to this. It's pretty clear what we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks to prepare for this December session, so we can leave it for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. It's quite sobering, actually. But it's a hard decision and a hard conversation we need to have, so thanks for presenting it to us and getting this out into the open so that we can actually have some conversations. So is there any questions from councillors? Chair Paul. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks, team. Yeah, totally understand the stuff that's come through from NZTA and that's challenging, but I'm really keen to, find what's actually going to work rather than make it unworkable. So I really like the work you've done on the different scenarios around where we could go. Yeah, and where you've sort of landed with your green boxes, with some adjustments for sure. But I quite like the idea of that two-zone thing. I think that's worth some more exploring. just to address that sort of those issues that we've come up with. And I definitely think we should keep including that those main concessions. So I like your 1A or 1B options. I think they're the right way to go, rather than cutting it all off. And yeah, just that price. That price sensitivity is going to be real key. And going from $2 to $2.50 and $3.50 as an options there. But I wonder, is $3 and $4 another option to look at? I know trying to keep it under $3 is important, but I still think that's a pretty good deal. I know it'll be tough for some, but overall I think that's still a pretty good deal. So definitely support where you're heading, and looking forward to us consulting on what we consult on and having a decision. So kia ora.
Stuart?
Sure. So just in responding to those suggestions and ideas. So and when we go away now, we're going to do some more modelling of a range of different price points below and above the $3 aspect, so we can understand the point that John made and the point that you've just made. It's also useful to know that if we hadn't had COVID and council back then and now had chosen to adjust fares annually, then our previous three-zone scenario, Zone 1 adult price was $2.65 back then. We've seen 22% inflation between then and now. And so if we applied that incrementally, the Zone 1 price would be $3.22 today, which fortuitously quite nicely aligns with the research we've just done around that $3 price point. So yeah, we're gonna do some analysis across that boundary to help us understand where we might land.
So I've got Joe, John, then Ian, Claire, Vicky, then Grant. So Joe?
Yeah, I just want to second Craig's idea around having a look at 3, 4. It sounds quite simple. And just, I understand that dropping a target into this financial year is a bit challenging, but for me, I think, 12% in principle feels low for me, just as a personal view. So I think we should be looking to increase that. Absolutely.
John?
Thanks. Yeah, I guess for me equally the 3 to 4, but I'm really interested in that conversation that we will have with NZTA as to, and the government as to what the expectation is of what we should achieve. And I guess as the instigator of the fare-free trial, which then turned into the $2, the flat fare trial, I guess I'm disappointed, but I see the reality of what we need to achieve. But I also absolutely believe in the simplicity of the system we have. So as simple as we can keep it, I think the better it will be to be able to on-sell to the public. $3 and $4 and the like in 2 zones is the probability for me.
Ian?
I actually had a question, and that is in that the big box of all the different options. Am I right in saying that the cost of the concessions to 19 to 24-year-olds is only $100,000 a year? Is that what the numbers are basically saying? $110,000 a year? The difference between 1 and 1A and under the $3 flat fare regime, which would suggest that there's only 110,000 trips done by people in that age group.
So the reason why they're so close is because the modelling is assuming a high proportion of those people will choose community services card instead of the 19 to 24. So it's based on a relatively small amount of people.
Okay, so that's that overlap you talked about in the other slide. Okay. Right.
So if council wanted to make the...
So the conclusion from that then is that retaining that concession is not really necessary if the people who actually need the concession can move to a different source to get the concession. I mean, that's what your earlier slide suggested, isn't it?
Oh, it comes down to the steer we get on what the need is. So in terms of the accessibility, that's what the community services card offers. We've the one of the key growth or the key growth area we've had in patronage in the last 18 months has been the under 25s. So in terms of incentivising patronage, even for those who don't financially need it as much, that's the case to debate, I suppose.
Look, I guess I'm a bit with John in terms of my natural instincts is to go for a simple flat fare system if you can. But, and I guess, so I'm sort of interested in why you picked 1A to 1B and, you know, those six, when to me the one with minimum concessions, given that those concessions overlap and that there's minimal disruption to passenger loss, it seems an interesting choice to go to the 6 in the box rather than the 3 on top.
Yes, and we can definitely broaden it to include the minimum concessions. Keep including it in the advice next time. The middle ground we've included is the 50 cents off for 19 to 24s, which essentially is people graduating from paying a child fare to an adult fare, having that time in between when you still have some discount. We see merit in that. We wouldn't be the first region to do that. It just, I guess, in terms of embedding those behaviours as people go to adulthood, that's there is a lot of there are positive case studies about how even into your mid-20s, that's an important.
Stuart?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, at the moment, up until recently, the general viable steer that council have been giving us is some concessions have value for the community. And the primary reason behind that has been a desire to see patronage growth, behaviour change, mode shift from driving cars to using PT. It's clear from the information we've received from NZTA that a much higher level of importance is now being placed on the economics of public transport. And that ultimately has a consequence that you are chasing a different target now. You're chasing a revenue target versus a patronage target. So the playing field is tilted somewhat. Yeah.
John, you had very quick.
Very quickly, I just the comment of the thanks that we did receive from Lincoln University, the Vice Chancellor and the like, of having those tertiary fares and the bus service and the increase there of providing those opportunities. And I also note, I guess, that the traffic congestion on Springs Road, which will only further increase, so the more we can do. So there's a bunch of things that sit in there, but I recognise the challenges that we face. But I just note those two things.
Claire? Press your button.
If we're not going to bring a flat fare stuff back, my question might be irrelevant, and you've passed the slide anyway. But I just want to, where you talk about triggering the rating equity issue around the flat fare thinking, I thought that we worked out the difference that was required to make it up, and it was actually put in each of the respective TAs anyways. Is that not correct? Just give me a yes or no on that question.
No, that's not how it works at the moment. Yeah.
Vicky? Oh, have you got another one? Sorry, Claire. Yeah, give a comment.
Your button, Councillor.
I'm pretty comfortable with a two-zone model going forward. I do think that the fare trial probably does mean it's going to be a significant jump, and I think it's about how we communicate that. And your little example that you just gave around, the inflation proof from previously might be something that we can actually constructively use in putting out that discussion. I think if we are going to go out and consult on this, which presumably we may have to, we know what's going to come back, and then then what? Where does it leave us? So once again, that story and the reasons why we're going out is really important. So yeah, $2 model, and I would certainly even entertain up to the $3, $4. I think Waimakariri, I mean, they're not going to want to jump back up to $4, but they are realistic.
Vicky.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, to the under 25 concession, there's a simplicity for the user in that, because the community service card, you actually got to go and sort out the community service card, and I don't. A lot of people I don't think get it even when they could, in theory. And so yeah, I would be cautious about risking losing under 25 patronage that are our long-term passengers. So for what looks like a very small amount of difference. I am wondering, are we still going to have conversations around like family tickets, say on weekends when we know buses are not as busy? So that sort of sets off, because if we start going to $3 and it's 2 adults and then the kids as well, like the package as a family suddenly starts looking less attractive compared with like parking that you can get in Christchurch and things like that. So I'd be really interested, given our new fancy system that we'll have in place, to look at those. So some of those more niche ways of incentivizing particular groups, and so on the two zone. So, and just reiterating that I believe that would mean if you're staying in your zone 2, if you're staying and the bus is travelling around, say Lincoln, and that you're still in one zone, you're on the lower fare. But where those buses are coming in from the, Waimakariri and Rolleston, I mean, they're really almost overly patronised in places. And so, is there an opportunity to potentially think about essentially like a premium service fare, which is recognising, it's very direct, it's quick, it's, it's like a premium service. So I wonder whether that's something, but maybe that accounts for all of the buses that do the 2 zone. I'm not familiar enough with those services, but certainly I think a differentiation between, if you're just within Christchurch, because some people might only want to go 2 stops and they're having to pay $3, and then you can get on a premium service that comes from Waimakariri and travel straight through and super quick relatively to some of your windy services in Christchurch, and you're paying only the same. So yeah, I think we need to have some differentiation there.
So yes, and that is all stuff which Multimove will enable, and from our perspective, it's further reason why either the 1 zone or the two zone approach. I'll rephrase that. It's one reason why 3 zones we think is problematic, because all these add-ons on top of an already complex suite of fares would be very hard to communicate with the intra and inter-district fares. That will be adding family passes, adding potentially premium for direct services. That would be workable.
Grant.
Thanks for this. I mean, my preference is still flat fare, single zone. And if you're doing the modelling, how could you achieve that in terms of? I'd actually written down $3.50 to $3.50 before you said it was $3.22 if we had carried on, that inflationary thing. So I'd be really keen to see that, mainly because of the feedback that we get from the public about the simplicity of the system, easy to understand. It's reasonably affordable, and even in the PT plan hearings that the same message is about the simplicity and the reasonable value for money that people see. So I mean, if that could be if that could be modelled, I think that would be really, really quite good. Broaden that out. One of the things that you're talking about here, and what we were talking about before in terms of the new, the government's requiring this stuff, that's still not going to deliver what we need in terms of revenue, which to my mind then means that we have to go back potentially to look at doing something with our OPEX, the route reduction, channeling buses into the high end core routes to increase frequency, to increase patronage and the dollar value from that scenario, maybe that, you know, so you're taking away from some potentially, and adding it on others. So it's that frequency reliability issue could come out of the restructuring to increase patronage. That's what I thought. But I really like what Vicky was saying, because the hearing process is also picking up what people wanting, things like a range of ticket scenarios, the family ticket. There was a question about free nighttime fares. So there's hardly anybody travels in the bus and they still go round and round with hardly anybody in it. It might be a way of encouraging people to either spend money in, you know, the lateral thinking of why do they do that? What are the advantages of that? And the other thing, weekends, you know, and event buses, all that sort of stuff. So what is the range of services that we can provide people outside the norm, and how we could factor that in any modelling or options that come back to us.
Stuart?
Thanks, Grant. There's quite a lot of things in there. In terms of the last point, from the modelling perspective, we're not going to be able to accommodate that range of modelling in the time frames we've got available to us. So we're going to have to keep it very simple and tight. And so I think, listening to the views today, we're going to box up a range of price points aligned with one zone versus two zone, straddling this $3 boundary, so you get to see a range of choices there. I think that's where we're the most pragmatic and realistic options. Under this new way of thinking about private revenue share, any additional service that we offer, we're going to need to consider the economics of that additional service. So the conversation we had around Te Kaha a few weeks ago was a good example, where we know when that stadium has an event that fills it, our current network frequency that operates in the evenings, it will not be sufficient to carry the demand that will come. And so we'll have to add vehicles, and that adds cost. And so now we'll have to think about, if we add cost, are we achieving this level of private revenue ratio for that investment? Otherwise, we need to question, is it economic to do it? And so this is the challenge we're going to face. Now, every time we want to improve our service, we're going to have to understand the consequence of that additional cost to the ratio.
Yeah, in terms of the two-zone thing, if that's obviously one of the options going to come back to us, it would be really good in terms of the map, the map of the city. Where is it clearly seen by people as being a logical place to put that boundary between zone 1 and 2? You know, we've got a spaghetti junction sort of thing going on, and I think I've remarked before, is the current orbiter route the change with occurs, or is it further out? So it's just, that would be really good to see a clear indication for people of where that zone change could occur. And in doing that, thinking about those things like John's saying, in terms of people coming from Rolleston, the institutions, the cross city, you know.
Grant, we're running out of time on this.
That's right.
I've got one question myself that was around, if you go to the next slide that you've got, if we are to achieve 18% in this financial year, what is the price that we're going to have to put the tickets up to?
Well, of course, at the moment,
At
Council
12%.
are not contemplating a fare change this fiscal year.
I know we're not, but I mean, realistically, that's quite a jump, isn't it? To achieve that.
If you were to achieve an 18% private revenue ratio this year with only 6 months left to run, the price would be significantly more than $3. We'd have to work out what it is, but it will be significantly more than $3.
Yes, I can see that. thank you very much for this presentation. We've got another couple of presentations to get through. I think Sonia, is it? Oh, no, Jessie. Jessie's taking those. So we're going to run through these relatively quickly in the next 25 minutes, half an hour. Yeah, it's quite a lot to get through, so we'll kick straight into it, Jessie.
Kia ora, councillors. So yeah, we'll just run through these slides very quickly, and we have discussed. I'm going to just run you through the regional rail and MRT discussions. You've got 2 memos attached to the information that you received in your packs. I won't go through those, but happy to answer any questions. Really, what we want to do today out of this session is to get a steer around the options that have been put forward as to your preference for the draft annual plan for consultations. So, sorry, I've jumped forward there. Skipped over the regional rail conversation. So what we've discussed previously with you, we've got the 525,000 in year 2 to do the market demand and rail utilisation study work that was recommended from the RTC to our council, and we included in the LTP. The options there, either retain it in year 2, option 2 is to push it to year 3, but noting that there isn't any co-funding from NZTA in the NLTP, and option 3 was to defer it to year 4, and again we would seek funding through the next round of the RLTP process. The option as well as option 4 is removing it altogether. But that obviously would have some implications in terms of the RTC's recommendation to our council. So really we were hoping if we could get a steer from councillors as to which option is your preference to put into the draft plan for consultation when we reach that point.
Okay, so we've got any comments from councillors? Councillor Davies?
Just with the memo, it appears to kind of suggest a bit of a change in direction from intra to inter-regional rail, passenger rail or transport investigations. Could you clarify what specific governance directions or decisions have authorised this shift from intra to inter-regional focus?
There hasn't been any governance direction shift in that respect. We've been running concurrent conversations with the South Island RTC Chairs group as well, because they were there was a request to the Otago Southland RTC to look at intra and inter-regional public transport as well. So we, at the last South Island RTC Chairs meeting last week, there was a discussion around this as well, some options being put forward about doing some work collaboratively, and that would look at the opportunity to extend that into further south, beyond Canterbury. We could also limit it just to Canterbury and do our own piece, which is the intra-regional piece to it, and that would the funding we would use would go towards that. But we could also pool our funding and do something broader across the South Island if that was where council saw fit to do so.
And so when would that kind of decision be made if we were to put it to year 4 as you're recommending?
Sorry, I'm just not following.
The pool with other South Island PTAs.
So we said to the South Island RTC chairs last week that we would await the discussions from our discussions here at council between now and December. There would need to be a paper to go to, based off our feedback here, back up to the South Island chairs early next year.
Is the South Island Regional Transport Committee Chairs Group a statutory committee?
No, it's not.
You got a further question there, Joe?
I'll leave it on that.
Councillor Mackay?
I think my question's probably sort of aligned with Councillor Davies' questions there. And can just somebody clarify for me, because I think the governance of this is in the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee and the South Island ones, and anything, decisions that come out, we have to obviously endorse, I think is the word. And certainly where funding is required, of course, we do have a say, I guess, through a long-term plan. So given the conversation that we just had before around the direction being economically based, I mean, I do think there's some sense in option 3, working with the suggestion around what does it look like in a wider regional perspective, a South Island's perspective.
Just in that context of the South Island, the money that we would have here, we've got 525,000. If we were to pool our funding with the RTCs in the south, there's the opportunity that this might not cost as much because we're collaborating. So therefore, our contribution might be less. So this is where staff have been trying to balance working collaboratively because of the opportunities that brings, but also the funding opportunities and how much we can balance the cost for our ratepayers. So there's savings in that regard, and off the back of the conversation we've just had around revenue, it's a challenging time.
Joe?
I mean, I'm just not really satisfied with such a shift in focus from both what the CRTC's original resolution is and also what we've funded through the long-term plan. For that focus to be shifted for an external non-statutory committee or group such as the South Island Chairs Group. For me, if it's going to be that kind of a shift, it's either got to come through this council or it's going to come through RTC.
Absolutely. Staff haven't made any decisions. We've just been exploring opportunities for collaboration across the South Island because we hear through both our own RTC processes, regional public transport plan processes, etc., about rail in particular, but also public transport more broadly, and the connections down south in particular, because we don't have any sort of broader connections really at this stage other than the intercity bus. So the opportunities for that is what we've been exploring. We haven't made any decisions. The current RTC recommendations and the advice that was provided to the RTC still stands. So we are still looking at the opportunities around intra-regional within Canterbury, and there were options put forward around up to Amberley, down south to Ashburton, Timaru. So we could do that, but we're just looking at in the context of how much money do we actually have, and we've explored those options. So it's coming back now to our council to make a decision as to what you want to do. Do you want to progress with this work as an intra-regional Canterbury piece, or do you want to explore something further beyond our boundaries of Canterbury, and when do you want to do that based on the funding and challenges around our fiscal position? We're happy to follow whichever direction.
We've got 7 of these to get through within the next, say, 20 minutes. So I want to sort of try and, this is not making a decision as such. This is just giving guidance to the staff to go away and build the annual plan. So just with that in mind, I want to get these questions out of the way and then not filter through, but get through these 7 issues. If there are sticking points, we can always come back to it at another point. But I want to try and progress this, but I'll go with Grant, then I've got Councillor East, and then Ian. Mixing and maxing, but you get the point.
I favour option 1 in retaining it in year 2, simply because the government haven't given us a lot of money, but it means that we can be planning, doing research, bringing the information together in year 2, so that we're ready to go. The issues for the South Island Chairs Group is to do with collaboration and efficiency of if we're doing the similar sort of work, that we work together as a team, which is the whole point of the Chairs Group anyway. But also that group is working on a South Island story, and that will help in building a case for the 2027 LTP stuff that we need, not land transport stuff. So I think it's really important that we continue that and work with.
So you prefer option 1?
Option 1.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not as simple.
Councillor, I know it's not simple, but we've got to get through. Councillor East.
Thanks. Just firstly, like to acknowledge that there is obviously an appetite to continue looking at rail transport options. I'm probably more inclined to look at option 3. I think our organisation needs to have a degree of fiscal responsibility in our thinking going forward. We started our rates calculations at 34% last year. with a lot of hard work, got it down to 17%. I think there's a few of us in the room would like to see it in single digits next year. So I think we have to adopt a degree of fiscal responsibility. If we go with options 1 or 2, whilst I am acknowledging, a desire to further the rail transport concept, options 1 and 2 are going to impact on our budgets going forward. We're obviously going to have to cut something to provide for this, or alternatively, rather unpalatably, accept a higher rate rise going forward. So
Thank you.
For those sort of reasons, I think option 3 is the one that I would prefer, and obviously it's based on getting some funding organised to proceed further. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll just try and keep the too many comments into line, but we've got to.
I'll try and be very brief. I'm option 4, could be dragged kicking and struggling into option 3. And the main reason for that is I don't see any future for passenger rail transport in the South Island, but I think we should be emphasising the use of our single line rail network. It's not really a network, single line that runs in 2 directions only for freight and not try to and they're struggling to do that properly. So.
Councillor Davies.
Yeah, I'm actually going to option 2, option 3, but in terms of option 3, intra, and if we're kicking it into the next LTP, you can expect me to talk about this more.
Councillor Mackay. Councillor Sunkel. Chair Pauling.
Yeah, I'm probably option 2, but it's probably not going to help. But yeah, thanks.
Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, one of either option 2 or 3. I mean, I can hear people pushing for 3. I would love to think we could keep regional. I think there is an opportunity for passenger rail in Canterbury, but it's not any. I don't think it's any time really soon. Well, it certainly isn't. So, given everything else, all the other pressures, I can see the sense in pushing to year 4. But I recognise that value of looking at Canterbury. I think there is a Canterbury conversation that's really important.
So I think you've got a bit of a sorry.
Can I just say?
I'm sorry, I forgot about Councillor Ward.
It's not just about passenger rail. If you read the actual thing, it says a utilisation study exploring road and rail-based public transport. So I just don't know whether councillors have picked that up.
Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I'm option 3, given the current climate.
And Councillor Diche.
I'm in between with option 2 or option 3.
Thank you. I think there's a bit of a steer there for you. Yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said. Thank you. Move to the next one.
So the next one is the Mass Rapid Transit funding that we have in the LTP. So we deferred 600,000 from year 1 into year 2. And with the NLTP coming out, there isn't any funding from central government to support this work. So the options, in terms of the work as well, we've been in ongoing discussions with Christchurch City Council around picking up the MRT work and progressing the next phases around the designation and into the detailed business case. So they're in discussions with NZTA around picking up a lot of the information that's come through and taking that forward. So what we've created here is the options around either retaining the status quo funding of 1.8 million in year 2, for the MRT work, but noting that that's not actually required from CCC to progress this, and there isn't any funding from government. Option 2, which is our staff recommended option, is to remove that funding in year 2, and then we'll reconsider in year 3 as we go forward. And for the same reasons that the CCC has that funding and capacity to do the work, or we defer the funding into latter years of the LTP as well. So
Joe,
yeah, happy to.
From your kind of perception, how eager are we feeling the City Council are around picking this up?
certainly at a staff level, it fits with the work that we're doing, and there is a keenness to progress this. You've got to think about this in the context of just not public transport MRT. It is also about the urban growth of the city as well. So the aspirations that we had around the spatial plan, which is around the corridor of improvements, and that's PT Futures, which is talked about in the memo as well, the uplift in frequency along the core routes and service, and those improvements. We haven't seen any funding from this NLTP around improvements at all. But going forward, if we can start to see those improvements and build towards an MRT system in the future, this preparatory work is getting us best placed. But CCC as staff have the capacity, they've said internally, to drive that designation process, which is a planning process. And then through the detailed business cases and the work that we do together as City and Environment Canterbury staff, we can progress that further in terms of the improvements and funding over time. But there is a keenness from staff to work politically, I believe, as well. Yeah, that will come through their processes.
Chair Pauling. Yeah, kia ora, Jesse. Just that. So I'm sort of wanting that assurance about the CCC work program. I know obviously it's not our council, but I think the designation work is really important. So they've told us that they're doing that. Is that going to be written into their annual plan for next year? Have we got that in writing? Like, I am just really concerned that if that does drop off their work program, then nothing is happening. And then also, do we need any money to support that process? Is there anything that we need to do to support their staff in the designation process?
At this stage, I'm not aware of any funding that we need to put into it. But as far as CCC's budgets, they're still going through that process with their council, similar to what we are. They won't know until early next year where they kind of land on that. Speaking to their directors in the transport space, they have some funding towards the designation work already built into the budget. So that's a few $100,000 towards progressing some of this work. And that would actually work through a lot of the planning team's work as well in CCC. So this is coupled with the priority development area work as well that they're undertaking. So there's a number of different strands of work that are all connecting on this, but the assurance that we've had as staff is that they could pick it up and take it forward from here. But we haven't got anything specifically in writing as such, if you like.
Annual plan time as well, just to try and see if we can get that assurance.
And our connection between us and City Council in terms of submission processes on their annual plan process as well.
Any other questions, Grant or Councillor Edge?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I mean, at the moment, the actual physical work required to it is not going to happen in the next few years. So yeah, it is that question about, do we actually need this? But if you're coming back to us in option 2 at another time, it's allowing you to revisit it basically without getting overly complicated. Our focus has to be on PT Futures and the core routes, and encouraging the City Council to increase that urban development along those core routes.
Can I ask one question? If you're taking out the $1.8 million in year 2 for your staff recommendation, does that still leave the year 3, 4, 5, 6 budget in there? Okay, because I don't want to lose the line items. Okay, great. Councillor Mackay?
You answered my question.
Oh, okay. Councillor
Sorry, can you just clarify that, what you said there?
So all they're looking at removing is year 2's budget, but the year 3, 4, 5, 6 will still remain. So, because I was worried that we're going to lose the entire MRT line item, but we're not. That's just the year 2 funding.
How's that different to option 3 then?
So you would cumulative, so if we were to defer funding from this year into year 3, you would have a cumulative amount. So like year 1, we deferred into year 2. So it was 600,000 in year 1, and it was 1.2 million in year 2. So cumulative 1.8 million, which is what we're saying take out. But if we were to push further into year 3, we would have a cumulative amount there that we would be putting as our contribution, if you like, to the overall MRT project. But again, this is dependent on how much work the City Council can do. We did have an overall budget allocation, which was 50 million originally. It was has been sort of revised down by NZTA to about half that as well. But again, this is just a fluid conversation, and as we go along, I think we'll need to have an annual plan conversation about both PT futures and MRT improvements as we move forward. So,
Councillor, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but we do need to move on. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, so my question really is, and I was thinking back to the LTP where we gave two options, or a preferred option and an alternative option. Will we be doing the same in the annual plan, or do we only have to do a preferred position?
option, yeah.
I think for many of these items, depending on their size, they wouldn't necessarily feature in the consultation, but they would actually be reflected in the budgets that we would, depending on the size and scale of them.
Right, I need to get a. Have you got a question there, Vicky?
No, really just a more comment that I think the PT Future stuff is sort of like being somewhat frozen on ice. And we know that PT Futures has got to get ramped up and be delivering in order to then make mass rapid transit function. And so yeah, slowing up MRT and that shift makes sense in that context. Yeah.
So we'll give a bit of a. Is there any?
Really quickly, like we've seen a huge shift in national direction regarding this. I'm starting to wonder if the PT, the MRT is the golden vision at the end of it. Like they might be exclusive now.
All right. Well, I'm gonna.
Sorry, just perhaps staff. My understanding was that MRT only functions if you can actually get people to it, which means a really good public transport bus network to get to MRT. So you can't have one without the other. You can't make MRT.
Right, we've got to move on. So is there a? So I'll just go around the room again as just say preferences or whatnot to give a steer to the staff and moving forward.
I'm option 3, thanks.
Yeah, the same.
Yeah, same option 3. Now that we know what's going on.
Count 3. Yeah, I'm gonna go with 2 as well, but there's a fairly good steer for you guys there. I think it's pretty even. So my goodness gracious, I'm so bad at this. Councillor Ward.
Yeah, 2 as well.
DJ.
Option 3.
Thank you. So you've heard. All right, we'll move on to the next one.
Oh, sorry, I've just taken. Just took control real quick. This one should be a really quick one. Essentially, we've talked extensively about the cruise ship's response recently. So you'll see you've got 2 options there, which is retain the status quo, which at the moment in the long-term plan is no funding in year 2. Or option 2 is the ongoing provision of approximately 30,000 from year 2 onwards. And that's what did I say? 30 bargain.
We've got till 10 past, so you don't need to like go rapidly. We've just moved our things, so we're still
So 300k from year 2, and this is year 2 onwards. So essentially, it's an annual amount that we put into each year. And you'll see option 2 was staff recommendation.
Questions?
I'm option 2, thanks.
Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, well, just a question, because I think for this season we've got 210k. So I'm just wondering what, and I know you said in the past you like to have the word contingency, but that's like 50% contingency. So just curious, why is there something that's we're already observing in this very early stages of this current season, which I know we're already stepping up on. So is there something that's suggesting we actually do?
I think it's just about making sure that we have sufficient money in the budget to cover, rather than going, it's only going to be 180 and finding that it's going to cost us more and having to come back to council. So we're going, ballpark 300k ongoing.
Councillor Edge.
Yeah, option 2, and in the knowledge that the NTS might improve funding through cruise liners and all that sort of stuff, so that's still going to go on anyway. So having that fallback 300k is good.
Oh, sorry,
I asked the question, but just to give them definitely we do need some support for doing those buses. So I'm definitely in the favour of option 2. I just wanted to clarify why it was at that level. Thanks.
I've just been advised that the cost put up includes staff costs, which haven't been included in previous years.
David? Mackenzie?
It seems to me that if we go for option 1, we'll end up in option 2 anyway, because every year we debate whether we put money in regardless of our policy. So I guess we might as well go to the end game straight away.
Councillor Burns?
Yeah, I'm thinking pretty much
Yeah.
what you said. It's inevitable we'll be discussing it.
Absolutely. Joe, yep. Claire, did you have a question?
No, my question was asked by Vicky, and it was a comment and a question that I asked when we made this decision around cruise ships, around the staff cost and the 210. I did seek that clarity because it did seem to be a little hidden. My preference is option 1, but I guess option 2 will be what it is, as long as we can use the minimal costs. And because my concern here is really around our messaging to the cruise industry by providing the alternatives.
Councillor Sunkel?
I guess it is option 2, but facetiously say I'd like a subsidy into Selwyn as well. It's just how the optics of it all sit. Thank you.
I'm thinking the same thing that Councillor Burns said as well, but I wouldn't mind at the end of this season to have a conversation about what the actual costs and how much it's actually come through, so that'd be great. And then we've got Councillor Ward. Goodness, thank you.
I guess I've got a little question. We've seen less cruise ships coming in this year. It depends where the numbers for cruise ships sit next year and whether the number of visits goes up and down. So probably more in favour of option 1 at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Diche.
And discussing that once we know the numbers.
Option 2.
Right, you're good. Next one.
Okay, this one is around the strategic framework for new services outside the existing Greater Christchurch and Timaru networks. We may need a little work on that title. Option here, so option 1 is retain the status quo. So essentially the resources at the moment, as agreed and approved through the annual plan, are on the delivery of PT Futures and looking at that detailed business case and getting us in a really good state for our funding bid in year 3. So that's the key focus of staff. Then the recommendation following that would be to schedule the development of this new strategic framework for new services outside the existing networks into year 3, subject to additional funding. This is a staff recommendation which effectively would have no impact on the annual plan 2025-26. Option 2 is that we push forward this work into year 2. So there's a provision there of 200,000 for year 2 only, 25-26, through PT targeted rates, or we could use reserves to commission additional work to develop this strategic framework, because essentially at this point, staff are fully committed to doing PT Futures. So this is recognising the fact that we would need some external consultants to help support this work.
And so when you're talking about outside of the existing Greater Christchurch, that's outside where our existing networks such as Rolleston and Lincoln and...
Yeah, so PT Futures includes the main urban networks of Waimakariri and Selwyn.
Okay. So any questions on this particular one?
Just to clarify your question. So it's for Greater Christchurch and Timaru, but not for the areas with no service now, or is there new services outside the existing Greater Christchurch, is all those areas like Ashburton that have no service? That's what you're talking about, and potentially a targeted rate on those areas to do the investigation. Option 2.
Yes, that's correct. So the targeted rate would be for the communities benefiting from this piece of work.
Chair Scott? I mean, Pauline? Oh my God.
No, good, yeah. Hey,
I don't even know
my question's similar to Ian's in that, what and where? Like, are we talking Ashburton? And so have we got clear demand? They've asked. I think if it's a targeted rate discussion, then we should test that through the annual plan and put that to those communities. And so if they want to pay for the investigations, put it to them, and here's what it will cost you extra on your rates bill. And so I think that's, and so I know the next one's about Selwyn, which is sort of separately pulled out, but I think the same approach there. Like I support, therefore, like an option 2, but it's about a targeted rate testing during the annual plan. Test it with them. Yeah. But But does that cost us some money or something? Or targeted rates? Is that? Am I making sense?
Yeah, so the conversation, and absolutely that could be through the annual plan, is the willingness of the community to pay for the initial investigation. It doesn't hold the community to any decisions after that. It doesn't commit them to targeted rates. It's essentially saying, are they happy to pay the targeted rate to undertake the work costing 200,000 in year 2, because at this present time we don't have the resource in which to do this work.
Councillor Sunkel?
Yeah, accepting we'll have a Selwyn conversation, but I suspect when we meet with Selwyn District later today, the probability will be that they would quite happily fund the work to know that it is on the way, and that when opportunities to fund uplift are available, everything's sitting in place. So I guess for me, I support option 2 if communities are interested in self-funding the development of that thinking.
All right, we'll go around the table. Councillor Mackay?
Well, I prefer
Your microphone, councillor.
I prefer the staff. I agree with the staff option 1, because as I read that, the provision of a targeted rate could actually be in part of the discussion anyway. Is that true?
No, so option 1 means that we're effectively not doing any work on a strategic framework for new services outside of our existing networks. It means that we're focusing our efforts on PT Futures and developing that detailed business case. So option 1 wouldn't include any work on this. Option 2 brings that work forward into year 2. Option 1 would mean that we do that work in year 3 with less cost because we can use existing resources.
Okay, well, I still prefer option 1. I think that we probably know where there is enough interest at the moment for people that want to.
Joe? Ian?
Yeah, I think I'm one. Because, I mean, I agree with Craig that it's a question we can put, but I think the question should be centred around option 1. And do you want something different to that rather than option 2? And would you then, with the upfront cost? And part of it is because the government has signalled clearly that they're not into any more My Way type trials. And as I understand it, the services required from the other areas outside Greater Christchurch are more for My Way type service rather than for a public transport, conventional public transport delivery.
David? Councillor Burns?
Yeah, I'm a little bit like David. Although I respect the staff recommendation, and but like Craig said, we know our communities want PT to be provided, and it ain't going to happen if we do nothing. So option 2 kind of looks like it's something. Yeah, I'd probably go option 2.
Councillor Ridge?
Yeah, I think certainly option 1, with extensions really, with the targeted rate, because there is concern in Ashburton, places like Darfield, Amberley, that we really need to ask the question as well. So it's kind of like two things, or a couple of things, but it actually ties in with what we were just talking about before. Was trying to get some funding in year 2 for the market demand study, which would have also addressed this same issue.
Councillor Southworth?
Yeah, I think. I think the option 1, but asking a question around essentially is merging the two, option 1 and 2. Like I definitely heard from Ashburton Mayor that they were interested in a public transport solution, and that they have very particular reason for wanting that sort of now. It's currently affecting their community right now, and so we have talked about getting ourselves sort of ducks in a row for when there's the opportunity the government does start to be more interested in public transport again, and we can't realistically do all of that in year 3. So yeah, that's a year 3, isn't it? Then
Craig?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I just want the question to be asked in the annual plan, actually in the consultation, and ask those areas if they would pay a targeted rate to get some work done. Or if they don't want that, would they want it in year 3? Like I just think the question should be asked. I don't know what option that is actually. I'm a bit confused.
Councillor Ward? No.
Yeah, I'll just go along with what the comment Craig made. We just need to ask the questions what people in these communities want.
Councillor Diche? Not there. I'm on option 1, but I wouldn't, if TAF, and when we do the annual plan, if we're going that direction, we can ask a question.
Yeah, I think thanks, and
I didn't hear a thing you said, but okay.
Sorry, can I just, for quick clarification, this is to develop a strategic framework for new services. This is outside our existing approved routes. This is not to do route design. This is not to decide, like origin and destinations. This is to do a strategic framework in which we can then look at the potential viability and opportunities for these kind of routes. So this is kind of your first piece of work. So I just want to really clarify what this work is.
Yeah. Okay. John?
We're talking about targeted rates. What if the TAs go, we want this work done, here is the check? Does that change the thinking as opposed to the targeted rate issue?
They're not going to do that. Maybe? We could...
So sorry, just to clarify, one of the things that's important to keep in mind, even if a TA, for example, is willing to 100% fund some work through PT targeted rates, that does count as part of the private revenue share. So essentially, anything you put in terms of increasing operating costs, you will then have to offset that with creating additional revenue. So any of these new pieces of work that we add into that ratio has to be offset. So this all has a cost that comes with it.
Okay, so we need to move on from this one.
Can I just say that that's completely mad, because that essentially requires the communities currently receiving public transport to pay more in order to enable another community to even start thinking about having public transport, isn't it? It's like a really odd... that's a real disincentive to sort of expanding public transport further, isn't it? Sort of locks us in.
Craig, did you want to say something?
As I understand it, look, I think the key thing for us is through our annual plan process is asking those communities if they want work done. I get that we want to focus on PT and the new information about the revenue share. Look, whatever. Our job is to ask our communities what they want, and if they want to pay for that exploration of study, and that means we get money in to then pay more staff, then that's what we should do. So that's our job, and we should stick to our job and not be scared by what the government's putting at us. We have to do our job, and if our communities want it, we should deliver it for them. That's our basic job under the Local Government Act. So anyway.
Right, so we've got to stay there. We're going to have to move on to the next one.
Okay, so this one is a specific piece of work following feedback from previous workshops, which is around Selwyn key intra-regional service reviews. So we have heard more around the Selwyn community being willing to 100% fund public transport services, because essentially at the moment that's the discussion we're having with these different communities. So you'll see option 1 there is to retain the status quo. Again, resources focused on delivery of PT futures, and schedule this work looking into additional service review for year 3, and that's the staff recommendation. And that would have no impact to this annual plan. Or option 2 is to put 200k through PT targeted rates for a targeted service review to identify key intra-regional routes within Selwyn. So that's routes just within Selwyn benefiting the Selwyn district, and to test communities' willingness to pay that at 100%. These routes would not be eligible at this stage for NLTP funding in 2024, 2027. So if the community was willing to pay that 100%, and once we understand what the impact is on the private revenue share, then we could look at what that would mean for us.
Ian?
I was just wondering if we can defer the preferred option for this question till after the meeting this afternoon, where we're meeting with the Selwyn District Council to gauge their opinion on this exact question. I can tell you what the Ashburton District Council would tell you if we were meeting with them on targeting them for $200,000, and that would be a flat no, but I don't know what Selwyn will want to say.
John?
No, I guess I'm with option 2. I was last time, so I'm still here this time.
Craig?
From what previous feedback we've had from the Selwyn District Council, I'd say option 2 would be what I'd do. But be interested to hear what they say.
Yeah, same. They've been really clear. They just want more.
Grant?
Yeah, option 2.
Greg?
Yeah, option 2. I think the submissions we got during the LTP were very clear.
Joe? Clear.
They have indicated a willingness to pay for that, so I think that's fine.
Yes, that council has given us a pretty good steer from their last submission. You've got Councillor Ward.
Option 1.
And Councillor Diche. Councillor Diche.
He's busy.
So
okay, we'll move on to the next one.
So,
well, this is only given we're only given some guidance from the council about what might build into the annual plan. If something substantially changes into the next, over the next little while, that'll obviously give an indication of where things go as well. Next one.
Total mobility. So I believe this came up through the quarterly report. So you're aware, obviously, that there's a higher consumption rate. So this is looking at essentially the funding required to cover that additional rates from a local share. So, option 1 is retain the status quo with PT reserves being used to cover the additional funding required to cover Environment Canterbury's portion of the total mobility subsidy. Again, that has no impact to annual plan and staff recommendation if PT reserves allows. So we'll have kind of further conversations around that. Or option 2 is to put 1.2 million through PT targeted rates, and that would then generate the money and the additional funding required for Environment Canterbury's total mobility subsidy, because essentially due to consumption rates it's costing more.
Questions?
And sorry, there's no impact on private revenue.
Councillor Mackenzie?
So just and I should know these answers, but total mobility that's different to old people getting.
It's different to the super gold, yeah.
and secondly, the targeted, if it was PT targeted rate, is that just for the current PT targeted rate area, or is that for the whole of Canterbury as a PT targeted rate?
It would be for anywhere that has the ability to access total mobility. So it'd be shared across everybody who has access to that service. So it's a wider area.
It is a wider
area. Yeah. But it is targeted, yeah.
Other parts of the region that don't have that service? Do you know what they are offhand? Okay.
Chair Paulin?
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards option 1, but the review of this by government, do we expect that to result in some sort of positive change for us in terms of that money? Or
Yep, so it's under review now by the Ministry of Transport. We have asked for an update on when we expect to see the results of that. At the moment, all we know is early 2025, but there has been updated and new terms of reference provided. They are very aware of kind of the issues being faced locally and obviously nationally as well, because obviously this is costing more money. And a lot of it is driven through that additional 25% subsidy that the government put through.
Any other questions? Councillor Southworth?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, so is there like a targeted rate for a pot that's the total mobility pot that goes across all of the areas that have access to total mobility? or is it the general public transport reserves that are raised within the areas that have public transport, but then a wider area, including areas that haven't contributed to those reserves, still have access?
So total mobility services operate in circa half a dozen specific communities in Canterbury, and those communities are specifically targeted to fund that service. So this funding would be focused on those communities that currently have and consume total mobility. Yeah.
And in the past, there's been reserves built up for that.
Sorry, yeah, it's due to, would be utilising the PT reserves that have just built up through kind of the past few years.
So the shortfall currently is funded through general PT reserves rather than being targeted. We don't have a targeted total mobility reserve.
But everybody who has contributed in, like, there's the full area that gets access to total mobility has put money into the public transport reserves in some way or other, or are there areas outside of that? No.
Well, no, because actually we're spending more on total mobility than we're raising. Yeah.
I get that bit, and I get the concept that people need total mobility and therefore, and it's a social good. What I'm asking is, are there areas that have got not put into the public transport reserves at all, and the total mobility hasn't built up any reserves? So are there areas that actually maybe we should be looking at putting in some sort of specific targeted rate in order to build up some reserves who currently don't contribute to the public transport reserves? Am I making sense?
So that's, I suppose, the intention of option 2 is to, in effect, target the areas that are benefiting from total mobility to pay the current shortfall that we anticipate being in running the service next year. Over the last couple of years, we've funded any shortfall out of general PT reserves, so therefore the people who have general public transport services are actually subsidising the total mobility currently.
I sort of feel like if where there's overlap between those two like the general public transport and total mobility, that's fair enough. Like, it's a pool built up. You might have been using public transport, then you've got older and something's changed in your life and you accessing total mobility, and it's not just a quid pro quo type of a scenario. But if there are areas outside of the public transport rated areas that are now getting total mobility and aren't building up enough, then, is there a mechanism where it could just put a bit of target onto those bits just to start to build something in, not necessarily like the whole lot, but a part?
I think that's why we're recommending, given that there is a review,
yes,
because this is costing the ratepayers of Canterbury a significant amount, but it's also costing the national taxpayer a significant amount, and so there is appetite to look at this, and so to wait for the outcome of that review before we decide what is the so allow the arrangements we've currently got in place to run for another year, because there's also options around the level of subsidy that that Canterbury wants to use. Some areas of the country don't have total mobility. They don't have the service. So there are a number of options that council can choose, but we as staff believe that waiting for the outcome of the review, which should be available before the end of this financial year, will give us a much clearer steer about long-term where do we go with this.
Yep.
Make it really clear. So this decision here is just for 1 year, and that's why we've suggested it being just 1 year. We're going to know more, but obviously we can only strike the rates once. So essentially we're hedging our bets, and then we'll have to look at what the new model looks like following the Ministry of Transport review.
Councillor Edge.
I'm going for option 2 because we know that it's draining our reserves at the moment. Reserves are for things that are generally unpredicted. We know that it's predicted that it's likely that this will continue. Who knows when the government's going to do these reviews, and we should be sure. And if the review takes place and we don't have to use it all, it can either go into reserves or we reduce it. But option 2.
Councillor Burns.
Yeah, that was pretty convincing. That was pretty convincing, Grant, actually. You probably swayed me, I think. Yeah.
Okay, good. Councillor East.
I was going to ask a question around option 1. That comment there, staff recommended if PT reserves allows. What's the risk that it may not allow it? That sort of impacts on my decision.
We'll be able to bring that information back to council once we've done a bit more work. So a lot of the work we've been doing to look at the different decisions as well is kind of helping us to understand what that reserves will look like. So we'll be able to bring that information back.
But our assumption is that we wouldn't have put the option up if we didn't believe that PT.
Yeah, well, I was inclined to support option 1, but I'm probably less inclined to because of the sort of non-clarity around how it may impact on PT reserves. So I think I'd leave my options open.
Ian?
Yeah, I'm a bit like David. I'm afraid I can't quite. I'm in favour of effectively those areas that get the service for fully funding the service, but I take the staff recommendation that actually if we wait for this review to be done, we might be in a better position to make a decision. So I'm not sure which of the options I like. I'm not sure I have an opinion as to which is the best option. It's somewhere in between the two, really.
Yeah, Grant's persuaded me as well, number 2.
I'm number 1. My understanding is currently we've got about 15 mil in the public transport reserves. Is that correct? Something like that. And some of that's been built up, taxpayer and ratepayer support that's already there and we haven't used. So I'm quite comfortable with actually following staff's option 1.
I probably lean towards option 2, fundamentally letting the costs fall where they lie.
Councillor Ward?
It's just the same as what John said, option 2, let the costs occur where they lie.
Councillor Diche?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, good. Option 2, thank you.
It's a good steer. Next one. I'm option 2, by the way.
Kalfai Council, we've got through an awful lot of information today, so this really is just a summary. So this was only related to the summary should all the staff recommendations be changed. This information will be updated and we'll provide a full table with all the options and all the financial implications in the next workshop on the 4th. And so, yeah, so essentially the next time you see us will be the 4th of December workshop. We also have and we've talked about it today, we've got a session with Selwyn District Council this afternoon as well. So we'll be able to pull back some of the feedback through into these discussions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That took a little bit longer than we anticipated, but these were important conversations for the council to have to give you a good indication of where our thinking's at this point in time. So thank you very much. Councillors, we will break for lunch now. We did have a delegations manual briefing for 12 o'clock to 12:30, but we thought that this was really important for the annual plan to get this out of the way so that we, and especially with the information that we received in the first briefing was really important for councillors to get that information. So is there any questions around that?
Just that some of us have got some commitments after lunch, but I believe there's an hour free from 3 to 4.
So the Chief Executive has...
Yeah, so we've got the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and then there are some other commitments. I'm not sure if we can adjust the schedule. I'll double check. If we can, we will, and if not, we will find another briefing time for you.
So we'll come back at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.